Imagine if your boss could cut your pay by any amount at any time without warning or justification. Imagine if they could change the rules of your job after the fact without telling you. That sounds illegal, right? Well, this is the reality for millions of workers engaged in what we commonly call the gig economy. With little to no labor protections, inconsistent workload, and conditions that vary widely from job to job, gig work has been on the rise. As many as 70 million Americans engage in the gig economy, either full-time or as a supplement to other sources of income. And this isn't just Uber drivers or Instacart shoppers. This includes freelancers of all types, artists, content creators, contract employees in offices or service work, and many others. While gig work can feel freeing from the constraints of W-2 employment, it is precarious and comes with a lot of drawbacks. And the people who hire gig workers know this. Apps like Uber and Doordash have been accused of manipulating payment structures, stealing tips, and using algorithms to determine which drivers are more willing to accept lower paying rides. In the content creation space, Instagram has stopped paying creators for video content entirely. TikTok has reduced creator payouts by 95% across the board and given no clear guidance on what they expect in order to increase earnings. In the corporate world, temp agencies or contract workers are hired on a part-time basis to avoid being subject to regulations required of full-time employees, such as providing health benefits or paying certain payroll taxes, instead shifting that burden directly onto the worker. And there are almost no legal protections against this. 1 month, you're making enough to pay all your bills and maybe even put a little aside for savings. And the next, you're working twice as hard for 1/10 the pay and not sure where your rent money is going to come from. And you're not given any reason for this. Expected to accept it as a normal part of the job, or told to just get a real job. But the market for full-time employment is absolutely cooked. So many white-collar careers have either been automated away by AI, or the requirements to get them have increased so much as a result of strict applicant tracking systems screening out otherwise qualified candidates that even finding stable, long-term employment of any type has become out of reach without multiple rounds of interviews only to get ghosted or passed up for a more qualified candidate willing to work for less money. So you turn to the gig economy for its flexibility, quick payouts, and relatively low barrier to entry. At first, it seems great. You're doing well, no boss breathing down your neck. You can set your own hours and work at your own pace. But if you're not working, you're not making money. So you spend more and more time hustling and grinding, and you never seem to get ahead. And as soon as you start to pick up steam and stack some cash, if you're working for an algorithm, they find a way to cut your pay. This extractive logic doesn't stop at work, by the way. It shows up everywhere, including how our personal data is handled. If you've ever Googled your own name or address, you've probably seen it listed on random data broker sites. Old addresses, phone numbers, past employers, all scraped, packaged, and sold. Most of it came from things that you technically agreed to share, buried in terms you never really had a choice about. That's where today's sponsor, Aura, comes in. Data brokers make billions selling personal information, and while they'll remove it if you ask, the process is made intentionally difficult. Aura handles that for you automatically, requesting removals and monitoring to keep your data off of those sites. Aura also will alert you if your info shows up on the dark web. It offers real-time credit and bank fraud alerts and includes a VPN, antivirus, password manager, as well as up to $5 million in identity theft insurance. I partnered with Aura because I'm tired of systems profiting off of people without real consent. You can try it free for 14 days. Just go to aura.com/citiesbydiana in the link in the description to start your trial. Now back to the video. I've talked to a lot of people about their experiences with the gig economy, and one story in particular stood out to me. One of my Patreon members, Leon, sent me this message about his work with Instacart, describing the revenue as unstable and the process of getting trips as competitive. The wear and tear on your car and cost of fuel is often more than your take-home pay. Gig work is unstable and unprofitable by design, but unfortunately, it is the future. But where did all of this start? How did we normalize working this way, in which people cobble together multiple side hustles to hopefully earn a living? Before the advent of the internet, there are many examples of what you could now consider gig work. The hired musicians playing individual shows in nightclubs, taxi drivers or couriers being paid per pickup, paperboys, babysitters, and folks who worked all sorts of various odd jobs in their spare time. But the origins of what we now know as the gig economy are a little more recent. In 1995, Craig Newark founded Craigslist, originally a site meant for San Francisco locals to connect with each other and advertise events and services. It was the first platform to truly allow gig work in its modern context. Nowadays, most people use Craigslist to find free furniture or an apartment to rent. But it was also a great place to pick up side work, with companies and individuals placing help wanted ads for short-term employment on the popular site. Craigslist was, and still mostly is, a simple peer-to-peer community forum, where parties involved could negotiate rates and terms off-platform. What came after was much different. In most American cities, public transit is slow and unreliable, if it even exists at all. You truly do need a car to go anywhere. Even in dense big cities like New York or San Francisco, an alternative to driving yourself or taking transit was always popular: taxis. You could hire a cab to take you anywhere and pay the driver a per mile rate to get from door to door quicker than taking a bus or train. However, it was often expensive, and the taxi industry was heavily regulated and gatekept, and finding a taxi wasn't always easy. You'd have to stand in the street with your hand out hoping one would stop, or call a dispatcher and wait who knows long for a driver to show up. It was inefficient for sure. It was because of this that Garrett Camp founded Uber in 2009 and made their app available to the public in San Francisco in 2011. Originally set a higher price than taxis and only allowing black luxury cars driven by professionals, Uber eventually expanded to include amateur drivers using their own cars to pick up passengers, mediated by the company's apps and rides given out to drivers algorithmically. Uber grew quickly with venture capital funding and began lowering its prices substantially, undercutting traditional taxi services to the point where many were forced out of their careers, and ironically enough, into becoming drivers for the very platform that replaced their businesses. The company would begin operations in new cities, ignoring local regulations under the guise that it was a tech company and not a taxi service, and therefore should not be subject to the same oversight. It was under the common mantra of startups of the day to seek forgiveness, not permission, when doing business. And with substantial lobbying, it worked. However, it took years for Uber to become profitable, propped up by said VC funds. Originally, they paid drivers well. I personally drove for Uber and its food delivery service, Uber Eats, and was able to make a full-time living off of the money that I made. But slowly, over time, payouts dwindled, tips became lower, and the amount of rides I was given dropped, despite my 5-star rating. This was commonplace in the early 2020s, when many drivers complained of reduced rate of pay for longer trips, while customers were paying more than ever. This business model was repeated across various professions to the point where many startups billed themselves as the Uber of whatever industry they served. Apps like Instacart, Doordash, Grubhub, TaxRabbit, Fiverr, Rover, and Airbnb all sprung up and did what tech companies do best. They disrupted the market. But who did that disruption truly benefit? In every industry that gig work showed up in, individuals and small businesses were harmed. Airbnb wrecked the rental markets in many cities across the world, taking away important housing stock to be rented out short-term to tourists and harming the traditional hotel industry in the process. Until eventually, Airbnb started hitting their customers with high cleaning fees and ridiculous check-in and check-out requirements, as well as a lack of transparent pricing. Airbnb eventually became to the point where it was often cheaper and more convenient to stay in a hotel, but the damage to the cities it operated in was already done. DoorDash, Grubhub, and Uber Eats replaced delivery drivers who were hired by restaurants for an hourly rate with drivers who often made less than minimum wage, and the apps took a cut from restaurants, charged customers absurdly high delivery fees and service charges, which the company pocketed, in addition to the fees that they charge restaurants for being on the apps, often adding a restaurant to their apps without their consent. It got to the point where filling orders for delivery apps would eat into the entire profit margin and leave the businesses losing money on delivery orders. All the while, investors and higher-ups at these platforms took home multi-million-dollar salaries and replaced stable jobs with contract work, sold as flexibility and entrepreneurship to those who relied on the apps to work. Meanwhile, gig workers were never able to set their own rates, negotiate their own terms of contract, or truly work the hours that they wanted to. Because if you aren't regularly grinding out work on these apps, you aren't getting paid. And at least anecdotally and from personal experience, I've noticed that the higher paying trips are often given priority to those who are logged in and active most often. It's why a lot of Uber drivers will sleep in their car and start right first thing in the morning every day that they work. But apps like Uber and DoorDash aren't the only ways people participate in the gig economy in the modern world. That's where what's commonly referred to as the creator economy comes in. Although it's not typically thought of as gig work, online content creation operates under a similar model. Content creation is far more than just girls doing dances on TikTok, gaming streamers, or influencers trying to sell products. Creators come in all stripes, from people who teach others how to fix technology, to lectures on ancient history, to political commentary and absurd video artists. Creators have been making a living putting out content through platforms such as YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram for years now, and many have built successful careers off of it. And not just the Mr. Beasts of the world. There are countless working class creators putting food on the table through their video content. Full-time work has been harder than ever to find these days, and most jobs are unfulfilling and underpaid. It's no wonder that many turn to monetizing their hobbies, interests, or skills via the creator economy. This comes in a variety of ways: sponsorships, platform revenue share, or direct audience funding through sites such as Patreon or Ko-fi. Unfortunately, content creation has become increasingly unstable as a profession, partly because of the low barrier to entry. Young people consistently rate being a YouTuber or TikTok star as their dream job, and almost anyone has a desire to become a creator these days. And it's as easy as getting your phone, turning on the camera, and talking into a screen. The platforms know this. A few years ago, if you had the talent, following, and consistency, one could make more than a full-time job salary posting to TikTok alone. The payouts were fair and transparent. But throughout 2025 and early 2026, without any explanation, the vast majority of creators on TikTok saw their earnings reduced to pennies for content that would normally pay them hundreds of dollars. Even YouTube, which has always been a consistent revenue stream, has changed up its algorithm to make it harder for creators' older content to be seen and found, effectively killing entire back catalogs and destroying residual income many relied upon for years. Instagram used to pay people for posting reels in a similar way to TikTok or YouTube Shorts. And one day in 2024, without any notice whatsoever, it simply stopped and now pays on an invite-only basis solely for image posts. People who help keep these platforms alive and kept viewers on them have taken a huge hit in the past year or so. Personally, I've gone from making all of my income on social media content, rarely taking sponsorships, to barely making any money at all in platform revenue share, and instead relying on random gig work, part-time jobs, and creating content for other people and businesses. And my views have been relatively consistent. My content hasn't changed much. And this seems to have happened to every creator I've talked to. While platforms are still bringing in billions in revenue, they're sharing almost none of it with their creators anymore. Both the gig economy and creator economy are prime examples of what some have called technofeudalism. You can no longer own the infrastructure to produce your work, and you aren't afforded the same legal protections as traditional employees. The law treats you like a business owner, but you're anything but. You don't have the ability to negotiate rates, terms of work, or the ability to take your services elsewhere. You're a digital serf. The platforms fully control your access to an audience, employer, or customer base, and they decide how much of the value you generate that you get to keep, and can change it at will anytime. In a similar way in which peasants worked the land that the nobility owned and were provided a small percentage of the crops they spent their time growing, gig workers and content creators are never told how much value they actually generate or what percentage of it they get to keep. The term technofeudalism was originally coined by former Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis. In 2023, he argued that capitalism was failing and it was sliding back into something resembling the medieval system of feudalism. But instead of swearing an oath of fealty to knights, lords, and monarchs, we are bound to big tech. Instead of land, we exist as serfs in the cloud, renting space on platforms owned by Amazon, Google, or Meta. In this way, a few elites have control over the vast majority of resources in society and have a say in how we use them. This includes any sort of business you're doing via apps mitigated by algorithms. With the decline of traditional brick and mortar retail, small businesses are forced to sell their products on Amazon or lose out on potential customers. And if they don't, they're likely selling them on websites hosted on servers owned by Amazon or another large tech company. If you're a gig worker, you essentially rent access to employment from the owner of the platform. You trade your time and labor in exchange for being connected to customers, and the apps take the largest cut from both sides of the transaction. And the same goes for online content creation. You're given a platform with which the social media companies set the rules and rate of pay that they can change at any time, and they use the audience that you keep there to sell ads and harvest data. The entire system has been a huge loophole around traditional labor laws and protections, and since the majority of gig workers in the United States are classified as 1099 contractors, they're subject to much higher, more complicated taxes than if they were considered W-2 employees. This is not a mistake. When a company hires an employee, they're responsible for a significant portion of their payroll taxes and Social Security. When you're classified as a contractor, the burden is shifted onto the individual. When you're working a contract gig, they don't gotta worry about paying you minimum wage or providing benefits. They can change the rules in the middle of the game if they want to, and you can't do anything about it. There have been many efforts to rein in this behavior and instill fair rules and regulations for gig workers. In 2020, California's Assembly Bill 5 went into effect. It meant to stop companies from exploiting loopholes in labor laws and classifying workers incorrectly as independent contractors. The bill's intent was to require companies to label as employees any workers who were under direct control of a company or corporate entity. This was specifically targeted at gig work apps such as Uber, where drivers had zero input in setting the rate they charged and were beholden to an algorithm for the work that they did. Rideshare and delivery apps fought tooth and nail and eventually came up with Proposition 22. Uber, Lyft, and Doordash said that if it didn't pass, they'd be required to force their workers onto a set schedule and limit the amount of hours they can work, taking away the very flexibility that brought so many to the platforms. However, they also threatened to leave the state entirely if Prop 22 didn't pass. So what was Prop 22? It was put on the ballot and passed in 2020, and it was an example of corporations writing their own regulations. On paper, it wasn't awful. While it did permanently classify rideshare and delivery drivers as contractors, it provided those who worked over 25 hours a week a stipend to purchase health insurance and a minimum amount of earnings based on active hours on the apps, which was set to 120% of the hourly minimum wage in the state. However, it also permanently eliminated the ability of cities and counties to impose additional protections for contractors or regulations on these services. Most of the promises made by the apps after the passage of Prop 22 were flimsy at best. The health benefits were a joke. They required upfront purchase by the worker and reimbursement only after hours were worked, and if they didn't meet those hours each week, they were responsible for the full cost of the health plan, and they could only purchase it from a list of approved plans. There was no effort to actually enforce the minimum wage protections, and most drivers saw their rate of pay cut even more through companies using tricky tactics like using only the time you actively have a passenger or delivery in the car to count as time worked. And if you've ever driven for Uber or DoorDash, you know that the time you take to get to the pickup can sometimes be longer than the ride itself. The worst part was that hidden deep in the fine print of Prop 22 was that any changes made to it by the legislature required a 7/8 vote to pass. Even in California, with a one-party supermajority, getting 7/8 of assembly members and senators to agree on anything at all is nearly impossible. The problem is, as AI takes over many roles that used to be done by humans, more and more people are forced to resort to work in the gig economy and forgo the protections afforded to them as full-time employees. But they're not given the same freedom or flexibility as traditional small business owners. They're stuck in a permanent underclass of workers who were sold a lie. And as the job market continues to collapse, more companies are pivoting to this model and simply hiring part-time or short-term work on apps like Fiverr or TaskRabbit, rather than investing in a permanent long-term hire. This modern way that so many people work isn't what it was sold to be. It's not about flexibility or owning your own business or being an entrepreneur or whatever kind of bullshit they sell you. No, it's about corporations shifting the risk away from their investors, CEO, board of directors, and all of that, and shifting it downward onto the very people who do the work that the companies say they provide. Because if your boss is an algorithm, and I know as someone whose boss is an algorithm, you aren't a business owner. You're not even an employee. You're both the product and the means of production. And as time goes by, and employment regulations are loosened up even more, this is going to become the standard for how all of us work. And unless we can find a way to fight back and hold these companies accountable, they're going to keep pushing further and further and further until we are all dependent on them, working for pennies on the dollar and told it's our own fault, or just told nothing. Because an app doesn't give a fuck about you. An app can't talk to you. An app can't communicate with you. Half the time, these things, their customer service is AI. If they even have customer service. And yes, they call it customer service because, like I said, you're not an employee, you're a customer. And you know what? If you don't like it, they can just replace you with some other schmuck easily and cheaply because everyone wants to be an Uber driver. Everyone wants to be an influencer. Everyone wants to create content. Everyone wants to work for TaskRabbit or Fiverr for a few extra bucks because everyone wants the flexibility. Everyone wants to live the dream. So I don't have a solution. I'm stuck in it too. But if someone does, they sure as hell better run for president or something. I don't know, guys. I wish I could end this on a happy note, but I truly don't know how to. Welcome to the new economy and the future of work. Hope it ain't too bad for you.